Hi, welcome back to The Creator's Soul, a podcast miniseries about the creative process and its application in every area of your life. I'm your co-host, Elizabeth, a creative producer and director based in New York City.
And I'm HeyJune, an energy and leadership coach with a background in Wall Street and New York City tech startup. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the importance of consistency, community, and your values as the high of creative inspiration starts leveling off and self-doubt kicks in. So I want to ask you about the most dreaded term within the creative community, which is the term consistency. How do you stay consistent / committed to a process, especially a creative process, when you can't see the results yet?
It's incredibly hard. I'm a little mean with myself, to be perfectly honest. Mean as in I lovingly put boundaries around milestones or tasks that I'll set time limits for tasks because I've found that it's very easy to not show up, to find something to distract yourself, to find something else to be working on, or feel bored in the process. And it is extremely easy to just be like, oh, okay, I missed it this one day, or I missed it this 1 week. But lovingly putting some boundaries around yourself, whether that's setting a timer, knowing there's a specific time of day that you're going to work on this project, having accountability within the team that you're working on. I think those are some aspects where I have found that I've been able to stay consistent was by using those methods. And some days it's really hard. Like I will be talking to myself like, oh God, this is so awful. Like I'm so tired. I don't want to do this today. I'll be whining and groaning inside. But as soon as I get in the midst of it and I'm clicked in, if it's the right project, if it's something that I truly believe in and it's something I need to be investing in, I'm like, oh, okay. About 10 minutes in, once I've done it, it's it clicks back in. I'd say the other part of it is having a plan for the steps to doing the project.
Yeah.
And then having accountability. I usually try to tell somebody that I'm working on something if it's a project that's just me initially. Or I will give people permission, especially as somebody who's usually in a leadership position. I will give people permission within my team to check in with me, call me out. I will give myself deadlines that everybody will see.
Yeah.
So if I don't get it done, I'm not
that's
being
hard.
a team player. Yeah.
Been there. Hard.
Yeah. But over time, I think that consistency builds trust.
Ooh, that's a good point.
And
consistency, absolutely.
Yeah, that's part of what I really connected with in the newsletter that brought us back together that you had sent out was that you had talked about that in the context of a relationship.
Yeah.
Consistency builds trust. But I think that applies to you as a creative. You learn to trust yourself and trust your process by consistently showing up.
Yeah.
And a good example of that is usually in the mornings I will write. So some mornings I'm so excited about it. I can't wait to put it out on the page. And then other mornings I'm that groaning, whining, ungrateful person that's like, I don't want to do this. But by consistently showing up, I learned to trust that there are going to be days where I'm excited and days that I'm not feeling so great about it. And I trust that through consistency that I have produced work, that I have made my team, I have made meaningful contributions to my creative teams who are relying on my writing to take their next steps. And then I think it also builds trust with your team or the collaborators that you're working with. If you say something and then follow through, or you commit to showing up and doing something and then are communicative about where you are in the process, that consistency over time, even if you don't nail it every time, maybe that deadline matter, whatever. But if you're communicating and saying, hey, I got sick, kind of a common example, but sometimes you don't feel well, you get a migraine, get some sort of food poisoning. It happens. And if you're communicating and being honest about where you are and stay consistent on working along the project, you'll have some of that work done, but you're going to build trust with your team because you are being consistent. So when you do need that little bit of grace, it's not going to be a huge deal. You're not breaking trust.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so much to unpack from what you just said. Because just to take a step back, so the High Priestess card is all about polarity. It's a very misunderstood card. People keep saying it's about intuition. Well, not really. The High Priestess is more about like the dichotomy between intuition and intellect, good versus bad. It's when like we start from that. Remember how we start from the full energy, the infinite potential, and then it strikes like the lightning bolt, which is like really the magician energy. And now you start to like have to assign value to what's good or bad because you need that polarity to manifest, to create, right? Kind of like the feminine versus the masculine. Like you need that to create anything. So I often wonder why the term consistency is so feared. And I think it's because it's so confronting because if you think about it, it's closely tied to like quality and like values and like the judgment around values. And I think the reason why people have a hard time being consistent, not only like professionally, but like relationally or whatever, is because they feel bad about themselves. They feel bad about the lack of skills, or it's too revealing. Like I can't show up and do this thing again when I suck or whatever it may be. Right. And it's unfortunate because you and I both know like it's always progress over perfection. If you aim for perfection, you'll never get there. You'll never get there. Um, and in my work, I just get really like heated about this topic. Just have to put that out there because in my work, working with people, this is where people get tripped up again and again and again.
Mm.
The unwillingness to be consistent, which then breaks trust with everybody around them, plus trust with themselves. And I'm like, well, what did you expect? You stopped showing up. Of course, like no one's going to trust you. And it's like, whoa, I didn't feel good about myself. Well, no one's going to see that. That's actually like your problem. That's in your head and no one sees that. So I'm curious, like, how do you handle, well, as a leader, how do you convey feedback in a way that doesn't like prevent somebody from being so discouraged that they stop being consistent? Like, how do you like handle giving feedback? And also, how do you personally, for example, you mentioned earlier, like, you are pretty transparent about how you show up and what your deadlines are. Like, how do you like hold yourself accountable to that?
Oof. Yeah. To answer the first question,
Yeah.
I actually get so nervous and like have a moment where I'm just kind of like, I don't want to do this. When I
Yeah.
have to give feedback that doesn't, it's not going to be a comfortable conversation with people. But at the same time, I'm so interested in that person being successful that if I don't tell them,
Right.
that's what gives me the courage to be like, I have to see if I can
Yeah.
be a part of this growth.
Right.
And if not only for them, but for how that's impacting the team or the relationships that they're in on that particular creative project. So I always try to approach it from a constructive perspective. We all talk about constructive feedback, right?
Right.
Um, but what that really means, in my opinion, is addressing where the problem is, where something's not optimal, and
Yeah.
then asking if there's something that could help them make it better.
Yeah.
Because I think self awareness is a huge part of growth.
Yeah.
So if you're able to give the feedback, check in with them to say, what do you think? How do you think you can help participate in this? And how
Yeah.
can we help? How can I help you or the team help you? That often leads to a very productive conversation where you're then able to have selective actions to commit and follow through and then make progress.
Yeah.
There's a colleague of mine who is in film, and they talk with a lot of filmmakers, and they review a lot of films. Um, and part of the meetings with these filmmakers it sometimes is giving news that, hey, we're not going to pick up your film for
Uh-huh.
distribution,
Uh-huh.
which like nobody wants to hear. You work a long time on a film and then it doesn't get picked up, and you don't make money off of it necessarily. That's not great news. But I really like how they approach the filmmaker, because they talk about, before they give that news or anything, they ask, where did you sell out on this film? Are there any like areas where you feel like you took a shortcut or sold out?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. But what's so interesting about that and why they ask it is because if the filmmaker is aware of, the fact that, hey, maybe they didn't spend enough money to get a good sound person,
Uh-huh.
or maybe they should have budgeted some money for coloring the film and making everything look really nice and clean there, and they can acknowledge it, then
Right.
that's a filmmaker that distributor is going to pay attention to. If they come back and their next film is even better, like, somebody to keep a relationship with.
Yeah.
But if the film is really crappy and then they do not see anything wrong with it, then
Yeah.
they're very young and very just very much getting started with the process.
Right.
And that distributor will be like, that's okay. Like, thank you so much. We're not going to proceed. But they know that that's not somebody or a filmmaker that they're likely going to invest much energy in to follow or keep
Or
it.
they might know, the filmmakers might know, but they just might be too proud to admit or think that they can get away with it, which is an even worse trait.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I do have to comment on that. That is one of the things that will derail a creative project the fastest.
Uh-huh.
That creates an incredibly toxic environment.
You mean being semi-deceptive?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not being able to own that something was not optimal. But
This goes back to the consistency thing because part of consistency means being hyper aware of what's good versus bad so that you can unblock yourself when something isn't great by working at it.
yes. Oh my God, that's exactly what this is.
And a lot of people couch away the negative because they don't want to admit it, and it snowballs into not showing up because they don't
Mm,
want to be like caught or seen or be vulnerable. So it just drills like everything and everyone. That happens in relationships, that happens in creative projects, like you said, that happens in many facets of our lives.
yeah.
And it blocks the manifestation process.
I completely see that application or what you've said in every facet of life. Like in relationships, I'm thinking, if you can't acknowledge that something isn't going well, like a need isn't being met for you in a relationship, for instance,
Right.
this is something that I've seen a lot in my own relationships, where if
Mhm.
if you value certain interactions, like there's the five love languages, right?
Mhm.
So maybe you're somebody who really loves quality time,
Yeah.
but your partner loves to give you gifts. No matter how many gifts you get, that quality if that quality time is not spent with you, you're not going to feel valued in that relationship.
Right.
And so by not acknowledging that you're not getting what you want, and like you said, couching away the negative and confronting it, you're likely going to slowly show up less and less in that relationship.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the person who's giving you the gifts are going to show up less and less too because they can tell that's not pleasing you and they don't know why.
Yeah.
And they're going to be
Yeah.
like, "Well, I just might suck then." And they might just not participate as much.
Yeah, and then you're stuck in this cycle of essentially recognizing your own, or realizing your own destruction within
Yeah.
that dynamic.
Yeah. I think this is why it's important to anchor ourselves to that infinite potential at first, because when you do run into a situation like that, like a snag like that, you always have to remind yourself that vision is bigger than this temporary insecurity.
Mm, I love
And
that
that,
phrasing. That's so true.
right? And faith that you can arrive to that point if you can just smoothen this out by working at it, by being consistent, by learning how to spend that quality time with you, as opposed to like taking the easy way out, doing the quality gifts. Not that that's an easy way out, but you know what I mean? It's like just doing what was like comfortable for you. Um, so yeah, I truly believe the word consistency is closely tied to confronting your deepest insecurities and inadequacies, because that is the blocker. Like that is the blocker to anybody or anything showing up or being consistent.
Yeah. That also feels like it ties in with the work that I do within creative teams, where if we can't acknowledge the good versus the bad in a dynamic, and or the good versus the bad decision in a step forward. And I think like good and bad can be really difficult terms because there's always like this kind of scale of like relativity to what people's own perceptions are and
Absolutely.
all of that. But I think when we're talking about good versus bad, there's this element of like where is that energy best placed, or like where is that decision going to prosper you versus create a negative effect. So in like creative teams, if you're making a decision about, say, like a budget where you're spending money to invest on, hiring people or um, renting a space or whatever it is,
Yeah.
thinking about that from a value perspective, is this a good or a bad decision?
Yeah.
And being honest about that, um, is is a really important quality to continue to make progress, which is I think
Right.
what you were saying is like if you can't acknowledge it, then you can't if you can't acknowledge the good versus the bad, you can't then evaluate and make a decision that's going to get you the outcome that you're hoping for, or that bigger picture, like the dream that you started with.
Right.
That decision might be really difficult.
Right.
You might be losing something that you were like holding on to was very precious for you.
Right.
But ultimately, like, are you accomplishing your larger vision? Are you realizing that? If the answer is yes, like, it is worth that temporary pain, in my opinion.
Right. Absolutely. And to your point earlier about relativity, someone's bad can be someone else's good. So
Yes.
the faster you are honest with yourself, the faster you can redistribute your energy to something else that might be more yielding,
Mhm.
right?
And and also I think paying attention to if you are just buying into somebody else's version of good or bad versus owning your own perspective on that.
Yeah,
Dude, you have to know what your opinion is on
absolutely.
that topic, or you will get sucked into somebody else's vision for that project, for the relationship, for the dynamic that you have.
Right.
Yeah, paying attention to that for yourself is crucial.
Right. There are edge cases where being overly consistent is actually harmful. Maybe like, living a groundhog day life, showing up to the same job day in and day out where you're just like stunted and like not growing, but you want to be consistent. So you keep going and 20 years later, like uh, I don't know, you haven't really grown in any single direction. Like, yeah, that's bad objectively. But I think, see, that's another reason why people equate consistency as like something dreadful, because they think of scenarios like that. Well, I don't want to be consistent at something that's not going to get me anything.
Mm,
Okay, this is also why you have to like set guardrails and go back to the initial vision, go back to the initial like infinite potential. Was 20 years at that corporate job your highest vision for yourself? If the answer is yes, then yeah, maybe being consistent is worth it. But maybe along the way you discovered, you know what, my vision's kind of bullshit. I got to pivot here. That means everything else got to pivot too. So it has to be like a continuous evaluation process, I feel like, on all levels, like your vision to like your skill set to like, okay, where am I being consistent? And yeah, it's so easy to get like stuck in one of the phase and like just like down spiral and like not find out why you're unhappy all of a sudden.
mm. And I think something what you said there really stood out to me in that the consistency of consistency is equated with like maybe stagnation or
Yeah.
not growing or like
Yeah.
realizing your full self, but pivoting and showing up for that potential and the lightning bolt moments every day does take consistency. So
Absolutely.
if you can find a way to continue to stay dynamic within the consistent behavior.
Yeah.
Consistency doesn't mean I'm just going to stick and do the same thing over and over again forever.
Right.
It can, but to your point about the 20-year corporate job, somebody might be perfectly happy in that, but I doubt that they're going to reach their fullest potential if they're not doing some pivoting and some reflection and going back to the original vision.
Right.
It'll be a shell of what is possible for you. It won't be the full potential.
Right. I think that as you level up and as you grow, your vision evolves too.
Yeah.
So it makes total sense to revise that. Like no one's saying you have to like commit to your original vision from 20 years ago, right? Like that's another thing that people keep getting confused. It's like, no, like you're allowed to change your mind. It's okay. But I think what you and I are trying to get at is like the worst you can do is to create so much gap between your truth of where you're today versus your truth of like that 20 years ago.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm curious because in your experience with pivoting,
Yeah.
you've done a lot of that in your life.
Yeah.
And do you think that what are those pros and cons that you've seen along the way? Like, where have you seen things be very difficult and challenging, and things really become a lot more lighthearted and less of a burden through pivoting?
Yeah. I think that the subtext here is like, have I gotten backlash for not being consistent? The answer is absolutely yes. At least that was a subtext for myself. Because this is my family's biggest grief with me. They're like, if you only had stuck it out in this job or this company, like you would have made it big, whatever. They don't say that anymore, but for a very long time, that's what they believed. And I think I mentioned this before, but my whole definition of success is like the ability to shift identity. Like how quickly can I drop one thing and pick up something else and be good at it? That for some weird reason, like that's always been like my hallmark of success. Um, doesn't translate well to relationships, as you can imagine. But it's but to answer your question about like sort of what my internal experience has been, um, I I learned very quickly that I can assess a leader fast. A manager or like a team lead or even the CEO, I can size up someone pretty quickly, and I think I sort of made that my north star. Like, do I see myself respecting this person and working for this person? Heck, do I even see myself being their right hand person? Like, not like in reality, but just like playing it through in my head. And if the answer was yes, that motivated me to like stay longer. And what the traits that they all had that I really admired was actually consistency.
Hmm.
So if I saw a leader show up every single day, even when they like messed up, which I didn't even think was a big mess up, but sometimes they send out these newsletters like we fucked up and we're gonna fix it. Like I really respected that, and like business as usual, like day in day out, that really motivated me to like stay longer. If I saw a leader like be inconsistent, in terms of like promotions or comp or even the way they manage, even the way they communicate or like the way they delegate, one day they're like super hands on, like, and then they're like super hands off. I don't know, like maybe this is just like my personality trait, but I really value consistency. So when I notice that erratic behavior, I'd be like, "Oh, I don't feel safe here. Like I don't know if I can really grow here." Um but I think that's because because I think I know what it takes to learn something new, and I think I know what it takes to develop something new, and I know that like especially if I'm in a new job or new industry, I need somebody effective to like hold that space for me. Not forever, but until like I'm to a certain point, right? And I think when I work with young people, they don't say it like this, but that's what they all crave implicitly. They all crave that mentor. They all crave that manager or leader who can just shepherd them through that high priestess, that polarity, that chaotic phase of growing and evolving. I think a lot of people actually want to be called out.
Yeah. But called out in a way that is nurturing.
Nurturing and like and showing them like, hey, I do believe in you.
Yes.
Like, right? Like I'm only giving this feedback because you can actually get through this
Yeah.
and be better
Exactly.
than this. Yeah.
Given the opportunity for growth.
Yeah.
Yeah. I so identify with the leader, being able to trust your leader. And I think trust comes from the consistency. The
Yeah.
example you gave of being the same person throughout day-to-day business and being able to own your mistakes or places where you need to grow,
Yeah.
I respect that as well.
I also want to add the other personality traits that made me want to stay longer at a job was when a leader pointed out exactly what I could improve.
Hmm.
And it could have been a role or an industry that I gave no shits about. But suddenly, when I get feedback like that, like I want to stay longer because they're showing me, they're implying to me that I can gain mastery over something that before I didn't care, but now I'm going to care because if I gain mastery over this new skill, that's kind of fun, at least for me. You know, it's something in my Rolodex that I didn't have before. And that's actually kind of where I am today. Like all the things, like I get a lot of questions about like, how did you, set all these things up in less than 6 months, blah, blah, blah. Like I'm like, these are all things I learned from somebody else,
Hmm.
like stuff about the website, stuff with like all the content stuff, like even, and even in running a business, like email marketing strategy and like pricing and all that stuff, like that's, I didn't actually Google those things. Someone taught me that. And let me promise you, I didn't care about these skill sets at all before, but they all became useful. So I really appreciate the leaders that told me, like, you can do better.
And do you feel that these skills that you've learned, were they taught by those leaders who said to you, you can do better?
Yeah.
I so respect that. I love when people kick my ass and are like, hey, by the way, like, you stop. Like,
I
you,
had a guy, I had a guy who had no problem telling me, like, verbatim, like, you suck.
yeah. Wow. Wow. It's a little
Yeah.
bit of like a brick wall moment.
Yeah. Or he'll be like, listen, I don't understand this at all.
Uh-huh.
Like, I don't know what this is that you put together for me. Like
Mm.
I've had people who were so straightforward like that, and yeah, it hurts. This is the moment where people can quit. I really truly think this is the moment when people can be like, "Oh my god, this person's an asshole," and I feel bad about myself. I don't care about this anyway, so I'm just gonna quit. Like this is where chaos really sets in and giving up sets in. But people have to remember, like that is what makes the leader sets the standard.
Which is also why I think we share this, that if the leader, I don't feel that I can grow with the leader, you don't feel like you can grow with the leader, you're
Yeah,
out.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
So speaking out loud, now I realize like, oh yeah, actually that was a guiding force more than anything else. It's like I care a lot about learning things quickly. So if I found somebody that can hold me accountable and teach me a lot, without giving up, so to speak, on me, that motivated me to really stay in a role.
Yeah. And I sense and I see that you're a very high performing person, that you want to grow and you want to learn.
Oh, thank you. I try.
Yeah. So I think that's also a testament to you and your openness and a willingness to take criticism and then take it back to the infinite potential stage. Think about, what does this mean for me? And then also evaluate and say, okay, where can I do better? What is good? What is bad?
Yeah.
And that, to me, there's a sign of, there's a level of maturity and practice that comes from that too, being able to practice the evaluation.
I don't know about you. I have a feeling you've experienced this too, but I think for me that comes from a place of actually haven't been screwed over because I wasn't honest with myself. And or I've seen other people get screwed over because they weren't honest with themselves.
Yeah.
And, when you come across like real talent, right? Like once in a blue moon, you meet somebody who's actually like a savant in something. You're so like awestruck. I don't know about you, but I am so awestruck. And I'm like, wow, that's actually humanly possible? And I get so inspired by that. I mean, like there are some directors that come to mind who just like toiled away at their project for years and years and years. And it's like, God, like how many times it's like scrap something and start over and show up every single day. It's like most people can't do that, So I think it's also observing those types of people and being like, okay, like forget the money, forget the accolades, whatever. There is something intrinsically incredibly motivating to be able to gain that level of mastery in something. It's kind of like shaping yourself into a sculpture over time. That's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, I agree. I think part of that is also the recognition of the goal. Like what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to shave away in order to stay focused?
So I don't think people should be afraid of consistency. I don't think people should be afraid of being held to a certain standard. The whole like labels are bad or whatever the phrase like spiritual people like say, I completely disagree with. I'm like, you're actually starving someone of attaining their highest potential. If you don't have polarity, if you don't have chaos, if you don't create an environment where there is room for improvement, that's actually not a good thing. As a leader or the creator, whatever.
I agree with you. And I think what we can all be challenged by and hold each other accountable to is this deep questioning of where can I improve? What is good? What is optimal? And what are those things that are hurting me or harmful or bad? Maybe not just me, but like the team that I'm in, the relationship that I'm in, this project or idea that I'm pursuing. What are those good and bad things, or the yeses and nos that I need to be more clear on?
Yeah.
To continue to keep growing.
Yeah.
I think if our listeners today, and even for myself after this, I'm sure I'm going to have moments of realization where it's like, where are you? Kind of just not showing up and making excuses for yourself.
I feel like you didn't ask this, but I'm just telling you, I think you're very consistent, and I think you're really good at creating the space for people I can only imagine that you're really good at creating the space for people to like show up consistently.
Okay.
Like you have this way of just being like, okay, let's just keep rolling. Here are the 3 backup plans. It's fantastic. I love it.
Thank you. I feel like that's been something along the way with creating this podcast where it's like, it's going to be great. Something's going to happen here and we're going to figure it out.
Yeah. I completely agree.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in. And HeyJune, it's always so insightful to have this conversation with you. I'm excited to continue to grow on this concept of infinite potential, those moments of inspiration, and then what does that mean when you're actually staying consistent and executing on it, and how do you decide what to keep and what to throw away along the process.
It was a pleasure speaking to you. As usual, I got a lot out of it too, and thank you everybody for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to Creator Soul, a podcast mini-series presented by Pheydrus and Potter Productions. We hope you join us for the rest of the series and discover something that will help you meet your fullest creative potential.